Good morning, Gatefield Sounds. I'm John Ashby, owner of Gatefield Sounds Records in Whitstable. We're a business that's been established for 48 years now. This is our 48th year. We opened in Whitstable in 1979, my uncle did. But we first opened in Faversham in Gatefield Lane, how we got the name, in 1972. At one time we had 6 shops, and now it's just me here in Whitstable, but we're going strong. What is music to me? Music to me, it's an emotive thing, music. To me, it can affect my mood, depending on how I feel of a day, depending on what sort of music I may put on. So, often if I'm sad, I will put on what some people would call miserable music, melancholy music, which I find uplifting. You know, a lot of music that people find sad and miserable, people always say the Smiths or Radiohead. That sort of music actually I find quite sort of uplifting in a way. So music, it really is something that, I don't know, it affects the soul, affects my moods, it's just like a living thing. It's something I think scientists are still trying to work out, you know, what the actual general effects are, but it's definitely something in the brain that, you know, endorphins and such like that will. So music to me, music just makes me happy. Vinyl to me.
Does it differ?
I mean, I was buying vinyl when the first time round. The first things I was buying was records, 7-inch singles, when there used to be all the 7s used to be on the counter here, all the chart 1 to 40, and I'd come in and buy a record for 50p or whatever it was back in the very early 80s, my Shakin' Stevens records. In fact, when I was a youngster, really, probably I would be buying BBC records, theme music for Doctor Who, or Enid Blyton stories, Famous Five, Secret Seven. That was the sort of thing I was buying or was being bought for me. Digressing, for vinyl. Vinyl to me, it's an artwork. It's something tangible. It's something you pick up, you feel, you look at, and it sounds great.
There are classic memories of sitting in a student house or a squat or whatever else, smoking dope, gathered around a record player and listening to Jimi Hendrix and the Velvet Underground. And I suppose these are, you know, formative experiences, and and in some ways they're a good example of that kind of sort of communal nature of a record player. You kind of, it's more conducive to gathering around and enjoying music. Once you've got a record player in it and you're playing records, it almost fills the space and attracts people. There's something about it which encourages a slightly more sort of kind of communal living mentality, and that's a nice thing. It's a friendly, sociable thing to do. Hello, I'm Nick. I run a record shop in Canterbury called Vinyl Store Junior. What is music to me? That's a good question. It's everything. It's the soundtrack to your life, the highs and the lows, and I think probably my single biggest pleasure in life, I should probably add with a caveat, apart from my son, is the constant quest for new music. And there are certain things which I go back to time and time again, which I love, but mostly I'm constantly trying to hear something new that I'd never heard before. And it's the excitement and the thrill of hearing something for the first time that just suddenly becomes your favourite thing ever and makes you happy. Ultimately, it's about making you happy. Is music. It's a good thing. Vinyl's simply the best format in which to listen to music, and I think it's quite easy to get bogged down on format. But vinyl is simply a way of conveying music. It's all about music at the end of the day. And I think if you love a piece of music and you want to own a piece of music, then vinyl is the best format all round. But the reason that vinyl, I think, has come back in such a big way is because there's been a general acceptance. But in fact, if you've got even a half decent stereo, vinyl is the best way to listen to music. It's fuller and richer and warmer. And aside from that, there's the physical thing. There is something tangible and tactile and slightly sexy about vinyl. You get the sleeve, you get the art, you get something to read and hold and look at whilst you're listening. And the entire act of listening to music becomes much more interactive, proactive. You sort of physically engage with it. It ceases to become just something on in the background, which a Spotify playlist or a CD can be, and it becomes something which occupies a physical space in the room, and it occupies your attention as well. So it's all round. It's a different way to enjoy and appreciate music, and if you've got time, it's the best way to do it.
I am a collector. I'm not so much now. I've got all these records in the shop, and so my collecting, I like supplying collectors nowadays. I have got a collection, and I guess I'd be called a completist probably a few years ago, and pretty much would buy a whole range of artists. I would buy everything that would come out, buy them, buy the cassette singles, I'd buy the CD singles, the 7-inch singles, the new album, the vinyl and CD, the deluxe edition, the box set. And I've been a completist for a long time. But after a while it becomes quite tiresome, and being a completist means you also buy the stuff that the output of an artist that can often be not very good. So I envy friends as well, people who buy music as well purely on the basis that they can buy, say, the new Arctic Monkeys album that's coming out. They buy it because it's a good album, they've heard the single, they like it. If I was a collector of them, I'd buy it carte blanche. But different people can sort of, I'm not buying that album, I don't think it's very good, but then buy the next album.
I don't personally consider myself a collector of records. I consider myself a buyer of records because I love the music, and again it's down to the music ultimately. But then you kind of naturally and organically and almost accidentally amass a collection. I think if you're one of these people who slightly, I don't know, but people collect things because they are compulsive about collecting things. They want to amass everything of something, and they do exist within the record world. They certainly do, but that's not me and my experience. My experience is not. I'm not buying records in order to fill a gap in a collection or to get every pressing of everything. I'm buying it simply because I love music and want to listen to it, and if it happens to come on sexy red vinyl or something, all the better. But it's not a fundamental selling point. It's for music.
I see a lot of youngsters buying records. I mean, in our shop here I have people from all ages buying records again. Some people who started buying, youngsters who have taken up buying records. They love the whole art piece. You see them coming in group, two girls coming yesterday, looking at the record and sort of, really sort of taking an interest together and sort of looking and sort of, I'll go back to mine and we'll play that record. There's always something quite communal about it as well. And people coming in, sort of kids coming in, or teenagers or students coming in, saying we go round a friend's one night a week and play a record and drink beer or pop or whatever you'd have, and they like it. I can't say I used to go round friends and we used to just take it for granted. You'd be buying records. We might exchange, have you heard this? Or where now it seems to be more of an event almost to play a record.
Well, I'm from the age where I was born 71, so my parents always had a record player in the house, or a music, what do we call it? We call it a music centre. But it had a record player, and a tape deck, and a radio. And there was always records in my house from a very early age. There was stuff like the Beatles, but there was always records knocking around. And then certainly I had cassettes as well. I remember in my kind of sort of up to about 10 probably I had lots of cassettes. ELO were a big favourite. But then as soon as I was in a position to sort of buy things for myself, from maybe the age of sort of 13 onwards, I know records were the choice. They were the best available choice at the time. But there was just something that I liked, and it's never gone away. And formats have come and gone in the meantime, but it's always been about records for me. Even in the sort of dark days of, I don't know, sort of 95 to 2005, when not much was getting released and it was becoming increasingly hard to find. I have bought CDs. I've got no fundamental dislike of CDs, but records have never gone away. They've always been part of my life, always.
The last probably great movement was probably the Britpop movement, or Oasis, really, back in back in the 90s when everybody was walking around Whitstable or wherever, with a Ben Sherman shirt on, or a certain, with a certain style of clothing, with a certain haircut, and and before that, Stone Roses, when everybody was walking around in with sort of flared jeans, and there was that was a movement. I don't see so much of that now. I don't see any of the there are people that come in, lads, girls who buy heavy metal, and they might have long hair, or they might gothic and wear all black, and but not to the level it was 20 years ago. In my school there were groups of people from all genres of music, whether you were into dance music, whether you're into The Cure and gothic sort of goth stuff, whether you're into Guns N' Roses or Metallica. You could pretty much pinpoint who liked who just by looking at what their music taste was. Don't see that so much now.
In terms of owning records, it's as much about owning it because you want to enjoy it and listen to it. There's something about a record collection which you have on display in your lounge or in your bedroom or wherever it is, which is also it's a statement of who you are. It's saying, I'm into this is what I listen to, this is what I like. It's kind of a part of who I am. Which you get with books as well. You get about books on a bookshelf, and you might read most of your day-to-day reading stuff. You might read on your Kindle or whatever else. But again, once it's a book that you love and enjoy, whether it's a classic or modern literature or whatever it is, if it's something that you love and you know you're going to want to read it time and time again and have on display on your bookshelf, then you're going to want to own it in a nice physical, and it might even be a nice hardback format. It might be something which is a pleasure to hold and read, and is a tangible thing that you're going to enjoy. And I think there's big correlations between that and vinyl. Then going on to the other point you asked about, the people coming in here, I get pretty much every age group really. It does broadly split into two camps. Canterbury's a big student city, so pretty much half of my customers are students. But it's really interesting seeing what they buy. There are distinct student favourites on the kind of indie side of stuff. There's King Gizzard, Lizard Wizard, and Ty Segall and Matt DeMarco and stuff like that, which I sell lots and lots and lots of. But then they're equally likely to buy classics by the Beatles or Marvin Gaye or Nick Drake or Velvet Underground. They're equally likely to buy jazz. They'll buy across the spectrum. And then the other half of my customers, I suppose, are middle-aged men as a sort of broad demographic. And again, they'll buy a bit of everything. They will buy. They're probably more likely to buy second-hand. They're probably more likely to buy classic rock, and they're probably more likely to buy jazz, which is a bewilderingly large sector of what I sell. But they're also completely up for new releases. They're completely up for new stuff, and they're very interested in hearing new things. So even people who are from a certain era and buying stuff from, I suppose, the era in which they listen to music, they're still up for hearing new things, and that's important. The reasons that young people are buying records, I suppose, and everybody, I suppose, are threefold. I think one of which there is, which we have to accept, an element of cool, and there might be a sort of faddish bubble about it. But certainly I don't see that being a large part of it, because the major reason being that everyone's investing in it again. People are buying record players, and it's buying the hardware that kind of gives it legs. And also, of course, the record companies are investing in it again because it's a way of making money. If they make 0.01p off a Spotify or a download or whatever, and they could sell an album at 20 quid. Clearly there's money in it for them, so they're reinvesting. With regards to people knowing what they want and coming in and browsing, there's a bit of both. There are people who come in simply to see what's new, particularly Friday's new release day, and people come in and see what's new and exciting. And obviously I sell second hand as well, so people come in and sort of browse through racks to come and see what new stuff I've had in. But there are also an equal number of people who come in with, knowing that they want something or a selection of some things. And I think that you asked whether it's in competition with Spotify because they could simply just listen to it on Spotify or iTunes or whatever. And I think that streaming services, which is the way it's going, I think downloads will die out. The idea of paying £7 to download a digital file seems bizarrely archaic. I mean, that seems like a ridiculous thing to do. But I think Spotify, I mean, for me, Spotify is an amazing thing. I'm certainly no Luddite. I'm into new technologies. I think Spotify is a fabulous thing as a way of discovering music. And you can go on these journeys of related artists and hear stuff. And it means you can read in a magazine or read in a blog or hear a song on a radio, and you can then go and listen to the entire album. And you can hear it. You get that instancy. Is that a word? I don't know, but you get that which you didn't have in the past. So in the past, you had to then go to a record shop and buy it. And there was a very good chance that even though you liked the one song you heard on the radio, the rest of the album was going to be shit and you felt you'd wasted your money. Mm-hmm. You don't have that anymore because you can listen to it up front on a streaming service, and then you can buy it with confidence. You can spend about 20 quid on an album which you know you love, and once you do know you love it and you want to own it and listen to it and treasure it and keep it forever and have on display and potentially hand down to your kids or whatever, again, it might as well be on a format which you enjoy and appreciate, and that's what records are all about.
Well, the first record I bought was at a boot fair or a jumble sale of my nan. I think it was about 1978, 79, and it was working in a coal mine. Lee Dorsey, I think it was, a 7-inch, and I used to play that because it was the record I bought. I don't even like the record now, but I just know that I bought that I bought it as a jumble sale, second-hand old record, and I had this record player and I used to play it. But forward from that, the first sort of record single that I bought probably was Shakin' Stevens, This Old House. As for the first LP, as I said earlier, a lot of them, the first albums I bought were probably like BBC sound recordings, records, TV themes. I think after that, going forward, I probably was buying Michael Jackson Thriller albums, and that was certainly an early album that had a big influence on me at the time.
Music's certainly a key part of who I am, and it's defined me in various ways over the years. In terms of my formative years of late teens and early 20s, certainly I was going to gigs rather than studying. I didn't do very well academically. Music was my life and my enjoyment, and in a lot of ways my education as well. That's what I was doing. I was far more interested in going to see bands and listening to records and trawling through London record shops than I was in studying. Right or wrong, probably wrong. But it's defined who I am. Most of my best memories in my life, if I look back across my life, most of them have got some sort of soundtrack. Most of them have got some kind of music attached to those memories. And most of that is not exclusively, but most of that involves vinyl. Most of it does. Yeah, records never really went away. My first record that I owned myself on album as opposed to singles. I'd kind of amassed some singles, and I had some probably fairly naff stuff, which I'm not necessarily going to admit to here. But I think it was my 13th birthday. I got my own record player as opposed to using the family record player. So I got my own record player, and I got a copy of the Best of the Skids. And it's called Fanfare, and I do still love the Skids, and I do. And I went on to love Big Country and Stuart Adamson, and so that was a part of my life. In terms of early 7-inches that I bought, I was buying. Again, Big Country. I remember buying Howard Jones. I probably did buy some Duran Duran. Those were the days, but very quickly. Once I was like 13, 14 and we're going to mid-80s, I was very quickly listening to the Cult and the Cure and the Smiths, who are the holy trinity of great British guitar bands, and then into R.E.M. And these are all bands that I still love to this day. That took me through the 80s. By the time it got to the late 80s, I was staying up late to listen to John Peel on the radio and taping the John Peel sessions off the radio onto cassette, and then going to see the bands, and that was an exciting time because you have the grunge era, you had Pixies and Smashing Pumpkins and Pavement and Nirvana and all these other amazing bands coming out of America, all of whom you heard for the first time on John Peel. And yes, I taped them off the radio, and yes, I listened to them on tape, but at the first opportunity I'd get up to London and go and buy them on record. At the first opportunity.
One thing that comes to mind, and probably one of the most, that was something that did have an effect. I bought some records about 6 years ago, and in the collection were original Blue Note presses, and there was a first pressing of John Coltrane's Giant Steps, and just and it wasn't even one of my favourite Coltrane albums, but the first pressing of it just sounded like someone was pouring honey in my ears. It was incredible. So music can have that effect if it's, this was this record from like 1958, and just it wasn't even in great condition, the record, but it just sounded incredible. The sleeve had a big tear across it, but musically it was, that had an effect on me. People always, it's John from the Soundhouse, John from Gatefield Sounds, music John, it's something that's always gone sort of hand in hand with it, and people are always interested. And quite frankly, I love talking about. I can talk about music all day long. That's why I agreed to do that.
Oh, there you go.
Starters,
People have always seen me as being primarily driven and motivated by music. Never, I don't think, to an unhealthy, obsessive degree. I don't think so. But certainly I've always been the driving force for, going to gigs and going to see music and being into bands and talking about music on Facebook and whatever it is. In terms of pub quizzes, I do a lot of pub quizzes, and I'm certainly the music man. And I think that when I opened a record shop, I don't think it came as any surprise to anybody who knew me. It seemed a perfectly natural evolution of who I am. It was like, to be honest, I'm surprised I didn't do it 10 years ago. So yeah, I suppose it's very much a part of me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some nostalgia involved. It's definitely you just look at the sleeves and you look at. I think people are sort of drawn into it.
I slightly resent and begrudge this idea, but it's a nostalgia-driven thing, because it isn't at all. I mean, like I said before, it's all about the music, and most of the exciting music is new music by its very nature. So the fact that it's a good format, the best format, that doesn't suggest it's any way nostalgic. People don't say it's nostalgic to own or read books. It's just the preferred way for a vast number of people. So in a lot of cases, the same people are buying old classics, whether it's a re-release or a second-hand, or they're buying brand new modern indie stuff. There's a complete crossover. There are people, of course, who will only buy one or the other, but from what I see of my customers, again, they're just into the music, and good music can come from any era.
It's having something. I think if you've got the collection bug and there's an item that comes out by an artist or a band, it's something you want it, and once you get it, you get that sort of a very almost like a short-term little hit of I've got it,
drug.
And then you then there's the next thing that comes along, and you want that.
Are you someone that would see something that's very valuable? Because there's a lot of collectors that will see something that is like a one-off, the numbered ones as well, and then store them and never open them, don't want to play them for the value.
That's me.
Yeah, no, there certainly are people who, again, if it is a particular limited coloured something, people will want to keep it sealed and pristine. There are some people who do that. That's not me.
But I've friends who buy records. They just buy them to play. They're not worried about that. They're just playing the record.
So everything that I've bought, I've played and listened to, sometimes to death. And if it happens to be limited and coloured, it does add a certain level of excitement. Coloured vinyl, there is a certain something about it. And also, if in time it escalates over value, that's also a kind of happy side effect. But it's certainly not, for me, it's not my reason for buying. But if it is for other people, that's fine. The fact that a lot of limited vinyl does escalate in value, I think, because there's this limited exclusive thing about it, it does add an element of desirability as well. It certainly encourages people to buy it when they see it there and then in the shop, rather than putting it off. It encourages a slightly more instantaneous, well, I better grab it now because it is limited.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you something.
Okay.
Some of these come in radio broadcast CDs, which are generally questionable in terms of, because they're radio broadcast companies are not too. There's a few little loopholes, but collectors I generally just get them for a few collectors. This comes in number 200. So I think there's 300 of those. As soon as I see number 200, that's sort of, to me, I'm like, oh, that's almost like record porn in my. I mean, it's not number one. I mean, that's not, you know, I've got a number one at home. I got the Stone Roses. They done a repress of it 10 years ago, I think, and I managed to get number one.
Really?
But then I later found out there was a slight mispress, and there was about 8 number ones that were around the country. But I've still got a number one.
I think for me, I think that people buy records for any number of motivations. I think the majority of people who come in here, it's because of a love of music. I think first and foremost, that's absolutely it. There certainly are people who buy stuff, and you see it particularly at record store day and times like that, who are buying in order maybe to consider selling it on a profit in the future. Again, I don't see too much of that in here, but I'm very aware that exists. There are people who collect because they love a particular band or love a particular genre or a particular record label or whatever else. And of those people who are collecting, I suppose, there probably are some people who become a bit addicted and take it a bit too far and get a bit obsessed about matrix numbers and having every individual pressing of Dark Side of the Moon, and are concerned about condition to an absolutely paramount degree. Whereas I'm not really. I mean, particularly on second hand. I mean, obviously on the new side, everything's new and mint anyway. But on the second hand side, if it's a good listening copy, that's just as valuable to me as if it's a first pressing that's worth several £100s, because the music is the same.
Yeah.
For me, there's no real distinction between the two. There is when I'm pricing it, obviously,
Yeah.
but in terms of its value as a record and as a piece of music and as a thing, no, to me it's honestly much the same. Which maybe surprises myself hearing myself say that, but it's true. I'm not the kind of person who worries about the collectability. I just want to hear
Just the music. Yeah.
In 20 years' time, there's a fair chance that people will stream and people will buy vinyl. That's what I think. I'd certainly, as a businessman, I hope that is the case. But there's equally people of all ages buying back into it. There's people in their 70s buying record players again. Purely because they've kept their records. They like buying records. They come into the shop and they go, "Well, I can buy records again." You know.
But again, there's a whole variety of different people with different preferences. There are people who, the fact that they can stream it or listen to it on YouTube or whatever else, that's enough. And they would raise the perfectly valid question: well, if I can listen to it for free or as part of a £10 a month subscription to Spotify, why would I bother wanting to own it? And I totally get that. If the idea of owning it and loving it isn't important to you, I totally understand that that's just not going to be, that they'll spend their money in different ways on other things that bring them pleasure and enjoyment. That's absolutely fine. But for a lot of people, there are people who want to own it, and for that, like I say, vinyl seems a fairly natural choice. It never really went away. I still bought records. It just became rather harder and you had to make more effort. But I think in terms of its visibility, it certainly did disappear. And for the casual music consumer, it's a terrible phrase, but you know what I mean. It simply wasn't visible. It wasn't there in their eye line, so they didn't see it. Whereas these days, supermarkets sell it. You know, bigger Sainsbury's, Morrison's, they've got record displays, and for me that's fabulous. And I think there are independent record shops and other people who would imagine that I, as an independent record shop, would see it as some kind of competition. I don't. For me, it shows just how mainstream it's become again, and that's great. That's really encouraging, because if people know they can buy the commercial of this mainstream stuff in Sainsbury's, that will give them the confidence to go and buy a record player, a hi-fi, whatever, which will then get them back into buying records. And as soon as they want something more interesting, more obscure, more niche, they're going to come into shops like this. That's great. That's really encouraging. So it's very, very visible again as vinyl. And the other thing, of course, is that the media do love talking about the vinyl resurgence. They really do. It's one of those go-to stories. If it's a quiet news day, they'll run a story on vinyl sales are 400% up on last year. And again, it's great. It just normalises it in people's eyes. It stops it being some niche, weird, possibly nostalgic, archaic kind of format. It's not. It's a modern, living, existing thing which normal people are buying as their chosen means of listening to music. That's great. I mean, the other thing that has fueled the vinyl resurgence as it is the fact that a lot of the hardware, the record players, have become so much cheaper, accessible to people on pretty much any budget. I mean, you can go to Argos and buy a Bush record player for 40 quid. They sell them in HMV for 60 or 70 quid. And for me, again, that's great. It makes it an accessible entry point for people who are maybe not fully committed at this stage to try buying a record player and records. That's a great thing. They're not amazing quality, they're not, but nobody's pretending they are. There are horror stories about them destroying your records. They don't. I mean, they've got a ceramic needle, so if you play the same record over and over and over again on it, there will be increased groove wear. It'll do some damage in the long term. But in most cases, that's not going to be a major impact. The bigger argument, I suppose, against them is that they don't really sound very good, which kind of defies the whole point of vinyl. One of the key selling points of records is that they do sound better if you've got a half decent system, which these little kind of suitcase things, they're not, but they kind of serve a purpose. I see it as a gateway drug. I think it sets you on that first affordable step down the line, which will then again give you the confidence to go and buy hopefully a better hi-fi system. Anything that gets you started, in my book, that's a good thing.
I remember being in this shop when this counter was being built, and I was 4, and I remember playing and being. So I've been in record shops all my life. So I can't really sort of say that there's ever been a moment, or it's just a constant. It's sort of something I've always been around. It's not even something I got into. I think in one respect maybe, not necessarily my parents, but maybe my uncle didn't necessarily would want me to have come into this sort of. He'd rather have me. He knew how hard it was and is. Maybe sort of go and do something else. And I tried to do a few other things, but I would still be working here on a Saturday and working another job so I could buy more CDs and different things until until I took up the reins. It's as you said earlier, it's a lifestyle. I've always thought with my collection that one day I want to sell it. I don't want someone else having the I don't want to lumber somebody with this collection that potentially they don't know what there is there and how much love and care and time that I've put into it. So I see there has to be a point where I sort of pass it on to somebody else to get enjoyment out of it. But but a lot of people don't see that, and so it can become. I think it is an illness. I think it's recognised now as an illness.
I think one other factor which I think people maybe find a bit baffling about it is that we are becoming a society, because we're more digital and more online, where we have less physical stuff. We no longer have, in a lot of people's cases, they don't have bookshelves full of books. They don't have, record racks full of records. They don't have photo albums full of photos. They don't own. There's less interest in accumulating stuff. And the great thing about having a tablet or a phone, you can carry your entire life incredibly light. You can carry your book collection and your music collection and your photos. You can carry everything else in your pocket. And I think for some people, the idea of then owning an expensive bit of hardware and a bunch of records, which are bloody heavy when you're lugging them around, or if you're moving house every 6 months, it's a pain in the arse. So I think there are people who just view it as a baffling impediment to just their freedom and movement, really. And again, I kind of get that. You do need to be slightly more settled, I suppose, to want to have to do that. So for some people, it's just a physical accumulation of stuff. Why would you want to? I think the only other thing I'd want to add is that one of the good things about the vinyl resurgence is the fact that it has meant that it has become viable for people to open record shops like this again. With CDs alone and the move to digital music in general, it simply wasn't a profitable enough business, and you saw the number of record shops that went out of business. And I think the record shops are a great thing. Obviously I say that I've got a vested interest, but they're a great thing in terms of the social element, in terms of people coming and talking about music and hearing new music as a means of discovery, as a part of a community, as a way of promoting local music as well, which I think is an important thing. There's so many other reasons why a record shop is a good and important thing to have, and vinyl kind of allows that to happen again. So I think it's serving a benefit to the broader music loving community on that level, because it's meaning shops like this again can open and hopefully touch wood survive. Musically, it's still the same. But as an act of owning it, it's not going to bring you nearly as much pleasure. In terms of listening to it, it will do it. It might be more convenient to lug around and stick on in the car, but it's not going to bring you back. Oh, look at this! It's just beautiful. But also look at it. It's a work of. It's genuinely a work of art in itself. And then you pull it out, and look at that! It's just the most gorgeous thing. And nothing else will bring you that degree of pleasure. It's making me happy just holding it.
How big is this collection? Is it?
It's a big collection.
Is it a big?
I don't know. It's not scouted a long time ago.